Why you feel stuck, no matter what you try. You've done more than most people ever admit. You didn't just sit and wait for life to change. You tried to move. You made decisions. You forced yourself out of comfort. You fought thoughts that tried to pull you down. You pushed forward even when you were tired. And yet, here you are. Not at the beginning, but not where you thought you would be either. It's a strange place to be, because from the outside, your life may look like it's moving, but inside it feels like you're standing still, like you're putting in effort but something invisible is canceling your progress. And that's what hurts the most, not just the lack of results, but the lack of understanding. Because when you don't understand why things aren't working, your mind starts creating answers on its own. Maybe I'm not strong enough. Maybe I'm not consistent enough. Maybe I'm just not meant for more. And slowly, without realizing it, the problem is no longer your situation. It becomes your identity. You stop seeing yourself as someone in a difficult season and start seeing yourself as someone who is stuck. And once that belief takes root, everything becomes heavier. Opportunities feel intimidating instead of exciting. Decisions feel risky instead of hopeful. Even small progress feels fragile, like it could disappear at any moment. There are nights when your mind doesn't rest. You replay everything. What you did, what you didn't do, what you should have done differently. You analyze your life like a puzzle you can't solve. And somewhere in the middle of all that thinking, a deeper question starts to form. Why does it feel like something is holding me back? Not externally, not obviously, but internally, something doesn't move. And if you've ever felt that, there is something you need to understand clearly. This is not random. There are seasons in life where the greatest battle is not against circumstances, it's against misinterpretation. Because when you misinterpret what is happening to you, you respond in a way that keeps you in the same place. You push when you should pause. You rush when you should reflect. You try to escape something that was meant to shape you, and without realizing it, you fight the very process that could transform you. This is where the Bible reveals something most people overlook. There are moments when God does not immediately change your situation, because He is working on something that must change within you first. And this is not rejection, it is precision. Because God is not only interested in getting you somewhere, He is deeply committed to who you will be when you get there. That means there are times when progress is not visible, because the work is internal, and internal work is always slower, but far more powerful. What feels like being stuck is often a space where your identity, your mindset, your emotional patterns, and your spiritual understanding are being realigned. And until that alignment happens, movement will feel temporary. You may advance for a moment, but you won't sustain it. This is why so many people experience cycles. Not because they lack effort, but because they are trying to move forward with an internal structure that keeps pulling them back. And once you begin to see this clearly, something shifts. You stop blaming yourself the same way. You stop rushing the same way. You stop fighting the same way. And for the first time, you begin to understand that what you're going through has a purpose. Even if it hasn't made sense until now, it rarely feels like a sudden stop. Most of the time, this sense of being stuck grows slowly, almost unnoticed. It begins in a season where you were full of intention. You made a decision that felt right. You told yourself that this time things would change for good. And for a while they did. You felt different, more focused, more aware. You had clarity about what needed to change, and you acted on it. But then, something subtle began to shift. Not a dramatic fall, not a clear failure, just a quiet return to patterns you thought you had already overcome. You started delaying things you once prioritized. You allowed thoughts you once rejected to stay longer in your mind. You felt your energy drop in ways you couldn't fully explain, and suddenly you were no longer where you started, but you weren't where you wanted to be either. This is one of the most confusing emotional spaces a person can experience, because you're not completely lost, but you're not moving forward with clarity either. And in that space, your mind begins to create pressure. You tell yourself you need to try harder, be more disciplined, be more consistent. You begin to treat yourself like a problem that needs to be fixed quickly. But something inside you resists that approach. Because deep down, you know this is not just about effort. If it were only about effort, you would have already broken through. You've proven to yourself that you can try, that you can push, that you can endure discomfort. So why does it feel like the more you push, the less stable everything becomes? This is where something important begins to surface. The issue is not your willingness to move forward. It is what is happening underneath your actions. There are layers inside you that influence your behavior more than you realize. Beliefs you formed in moments you barely remember. Emotional responses shaped by past experiences that were never processed. Expectations you placed on yourself based on comparison instead of truth. And these layers do not disappear just because you decided to change. They remain active. So while one part of you is trying to move forward, another part of you is still operating based on old patterns. This creates tension. You feel motivated one day and drained the next. You feel clear in one moment and confused in another. You take a step forward and then hesitate without knowing why. It feels like inconsistency, but it is actually internal conflict. And this is where many people make a mistake. They judge themselves for the conflict instead of understanding it. They see the hesitation as weakness. They see the delay as failure. They see the struggle as proof that something is wrong with them. But what if this conflict is not your enemy? What if it is revealing something important that has been hidden for too long? Because before real progress becomes stable, what is misaligned must be exposed. And exposure is uncomfortable. It shows you parts of yourself you would rather ignore. It brings awareness to patterns you thought were normal. It forces you to face things you managed for years without truly resolving. But this is where transformation begins. Not when everything feels easy, but when you begin to see clearly. Because once you see clearly, you cannot keep moving blindly. And that awareness, even though it feels uncomfortable at first, is what starts breaking the cycle. There is a point where effort stops being effective and starts becoming exhausting. At first, trying harder feels like the right response. It gives you a sense of control. It makes you feel like you're doing something, like you're not giving up. But over time, something changes. The same level of effort that once gave you momentum now drains you. You push yourself, but it doesn't feel sustainable. You try to stay consistent, but it feels forced. You keep going, but without the same clarity you had before. And slowly, frustration begins to replace motivation. Because deep inside, you start noticing something that is difficult to admit. Effort alone is no longer producing the results you expected. This is where many people become harder on themselves. They assume the solution is to increase intensity. Wake up earlier, do more, think more, fix more. But instead of progress, what they experience is pressure, and pressure without clarity leads to burnout. This is where a deeper truth begins to emerge. Not every situation responds to effort. Some situations respond to alignment. And this is where the spiritual dimension becomes essential. Because alignment is not just about your actions, it's about your inner state. You can be doing the right things with the wrong foundation. You can be moving forward while something inside you is still anchored in fear, insecurity, or unresolved identity. And when that happens, your progress becomes unstable. You may see temporary change, but it won't last, because whatever is not aligned internally will eventually surface externally. This is why some people achieve things and still feel stuck. They change their environment but not their patterns. They improve their situation but not their mindset. They reach new levels but carry the same internal limitations. And over time, those limitations recreate the same struggles in a different form. This is what creates cycles. Not because you lack discipline, but because something deeper has not been addressed. This is where many people misunderstand what God is doing. They think He is delaying them, but in reality, He is protecting them from building something on a foundation that cannot sustain what they are asking for. Because if your internal structure is not stable, External success becomes a burden. It brings pressure you are not ready to handle. It exposes weaknesses you have not yet strengthened. It amplifies patterns you have not yet corrected. So instead of allowing you to move forward prematurely, God allows resistance, not to block your life, but to reveal what needs to be aligned. This is difficult to accept, especially when you feel ready. But readiness is not determined by desire. It is determined by alignment. And alignment requires honesty. Honesty about what you believe. Honesty about what you fear. Honesty about what still controls your decisions without your awareness. Because until these things are seen clearly, they will continue to influence your path silently. And no amount of effort can override something you have not yet understood. This is why the shift you need is not more force. It is deeper awareness. Because when awareness increases, alignment becomes possible. And when alignment is established, effort stops feeling like pressure and starts becoming natural movement. There is a moment recorded in Scripture that exposes this pattern with uncomfortable clarity. The people of Israel had already left what once held them captive. They were no longer in Egypt. They were no longer under oppression. They had seen God act in ways that were undeniable, and yet they were not where they were supposed to be. They were moving, but not advancing. They were walking, but not arriving. And what makes this even more revealing is that they did not see it at first. From their perspective, they were doing what they needed to do. They were continuing the journey. They were not going backward. But God speaks into that situation with a sentence that interrupts everything they thought was normal. Deuteronomy chapter 2 verse 3 says, "You have circled this mountain long enough. Now turn north." This is not just direction, it is exposure. Because it reveals that movement can become a cycle without you realizing it. It shows that you can be active and still be stuck. It shows that you can continue doing what once made sense, even when it no longer serves the purpose of where you are meant to go. And this is where this passage becomes personal. Because many people today are not standing still. They are circling, repeating patterns that feel like progress, but lead back to the same emotional place. You may not be in the same situation you were before, but the feeling inside you has not changed. The same doubt returns. The same fear shows up. The same internal resistance appears at the moment you try to move forward again. And because the scenery changes, you think the problem has changed, but the pattern remains. This is what happened in the wilderness. The environment was not the issue. The direction was. They were not lacking effort. They were lacking a shift, and God allowed that cycle to continue for a time. Not because He was unaware, but because they were not yet ready to receive new direction. This is important to understand, because sometimes repetition is not immediate disobedience. It is delayed awareness. You continue in what is familiar until something inside you becomes ready to see differently. And when that moment comes, everything changes with a single instruction. You have circled this mountain long enough. That sentence carries both correction and mercy. Correction, because it confronts the cycle. Mercy, because it reveals that you are not meant to stay there. It shows that God is not indifferent to your repetition. He is patient with it until the moment you are ready to respond to something new. And this is where the real question begins. What mountain have you been circling? Not physically, but internally. What pattern keeps repeating in your life even when the details change? Where do you keep returning emotionally, no matter how many times you try to move forward? Because until that is recognized, effort will continue, but direction will remain the same, and nothing changes until direction changes. What if the place that feels like delay is actually the place where God is protecting you from becoming someone you were never meant to be? That changes how you see everything, because when you feel stuck, your first instinct is to escape, to move, to get out of that situation as fast as possible. You assume that staying there is the problem. But what if leaving too early would create a bigger problem? This is exactly what the wilderness represented. It was not just a physical space. It was a process designed to confront what Egypt left inside them. They were free on the outside, but still shaped by a mindset of survival, fear, and dependence on what they once knew. And that mindset could not enter the promise. If they had arrived too early, they would have carried that same mentality into a place that required responsibility, trust, and maturity. And the result would not be blessing. It would be instability. This is where many people misunderstand God's timing. They assume that delay means denial. But often, delay is protection from premature exposure. Because not every door that opens quickly is meant to be entered immediately. Some doors require a version of you that does not exist yet. And if you walk through them too early, you will experience pressure that reveals gaps you have not yet closed. This is why God allows certain processes to take longer than you expected. Not because He is distant, but because He is precise. He is not preparing opportunities first. He is preparing you first. And this preparation does not happen in comfort. It happens in tension, in moments where you have to face your reactions, your fears, your patterns, the way you think when things don't go your way. This is where your character is formed, and character is not built in theory. It is built in repetition. How you respond when you are tired, how you act when you feel overlooked, how you think when things are uncertain. These moments feel small, but they are shaping something deeper than you realize. Because one day, the same situations that frustrate you now will require a different version of you to handle them. And if that version is not developed, you will respond the same way and create the same outcomes. This is why God sometimes allows you to remain in a place that feels uncomfortable. Not to limit you, but to transform how you respond within that place. Because when your response changes, your direction changes. And when your direction changes, your life begins to move differently. So what feels like delay is often refinement. What feels like being held back is often protection from stepping into something with the wrong foundation. And what feels like nothing is happening is often the most important work being done. Because God is not only concerned with where you are going, He is shaping who you are becoming. And who you become determines what you can sustain. Pressure has a voice. It doesn't shout. It whispers urgency. It tells you that you're behind, that you need to hurry, that if you don't move now, you will miss your chance. It compares your life with others and convinces you that you should already be somewhere else. And when you listen to that voice long enough, you stop making decisions from clarity and start making decisions from fear. This is where many paths begin to look right, but feel wrong. You accept opportunities that don't align with who you are becoming. You commit to things that drain you instead of building you. You move forward not because you have peace, but because you are afraid of staying where you are. And at first it feels like progress. There is movement. There is change. There is even a sense of relief, as if you finally did something to break out of that feeling of being stuck. But over time, something begins to surface. The same internal discomfort returns. Not because the situation is the same, but because the foundation is. You change direction, but carry the same internal patterns with you. And those patterns recreate the same results in a different environment. This is why some people experience what looks like progress, but still feel stuck. Because the movement was driven by pressure, not by alignment. And pressure always leads to unstable outcomes. It pushes you into things you are not ready to sustain. It convinces you to build quickly, without building deeply. And eventually what was built under pressure begins to collapse under reality. This is where disappointment becomes heavier. Because now, it's not just about feeling stuck. It's about feeling like you moved and still ended up in the same place. That experience can make you question everything. Your decisions, your direction, even your ability to choose correctly. But this is where something important needs to be understood. God's interruptions are not punishments. They are redirections. When something slows down, when something stops working, when something that seemed right begins to fall apart, it is not always loss. Sometimes, it is mercy, because continuing in that direction would cost you more than stopping now. It would lead you deeper into something that cannot sustain the life you are trying to build. And God, in His wisdom, allows resistance to appear. Not to block you, but to protect you. This is difficult to accept in the moment, because it feels like things are being taken from you. Plans that didn't work, opportunities that didn't last, efforts that didn't produce what you expected. But what you cannot see immediately is what you were being spared from, the weight you were not ready to carry, the pressure you were not prepared to handle, the consequences that would have followed a direction that looked right but wasn't aligned. So instead of allowing you to continue, God slows things down. And in that slowing down, He gives you something more valuable than immediate success. He gives you clarity, because when pressure fades, truth becomes easier to see. And when you begin to see clearly, you no longer feel the need to rush into things that are not meant for you. You begin to choose differently, not based on fear, but based on alignment. And that changes the direction of your life in ways that effort alone never could. There is a kind of work God does that no one can applaud, because no one can see it. It doesn't show up in visible milestones. It doesn't come with recognition. It doesn't look like progress to anyone watching your life from the outside. But it is the most important work happening in you. It is the work of reconstruction, not of your circumstances, but of your inner world. Because before God changes what surrounds you, He often transforms how you think, how you perceive, and how you respond. And this transformation happens in silence. In the moments when you choose patience instead of reaction, when you hold your peace instead of proving a point, when you stop feeding thoughts that once controlled you. These moments may seem small, but they are not. They are evidence that something inside you is changing. And this is where most people struggle, because they want external confirmation that things are improving. They want to see doors opening, situations shifting, results appearing. But God is working on something deeper than results. He is building capacity, because the life you are asking for requires a version of you that can sustain it. And that version is not created overnight. It is formed through consistent internal shifts. How you handle frustration, how you respond to delay, how you carry yourself when things are uncertain. These are not random moments. They are training grounds. Because if your internal state remains unstable, external success will not bring peace. It will only amplify what is already inside you. This is why some people achieve what they wanted and still feel restless, because what they gained externally was not supported internally, and eventually the weight of what they received becomes overwhelming. This is what God is preventing in your life. He is not just preparing opportunities, He is preparing your capacity to handle them. This means strengthening your emotional stability so that pressure does not break you. It means refining your mindset so that fear does not control your decisions. It means aligning your identity so that you do not lose yourself when your environment changes. This work is invisible, but it is foundational, because once it is established, everything else begins to move differently. You no longer react the same way. You no longer think the same way. You no longer choose the same way. And without forcing anything, your life begins to shift. This is where patience becomes powerful. Not passive, but intentional. Because you understand that what is being built inside you now will determine what you can sustain later. And once that internal structure is strong, progress will no longer feel fragile. It will feel natural, stable, consistent. Because now it is not being forced from the outside. It is flowing from who you have become on the inside. There is a resistance inside you that does not come from laziness, but it comes from protection. Not all resistance is your enemy. Some of it is revealing where you are divided, because there are parts of you that want to move forward and parts of you that are not ready to leave what is familiar. You may say you want change, but still feel drawn to patterns that feel safe, even if they keep you stuck. You may desire growth, but hesitate when growth requires you to let go of what you have known for a long time. This is not contradiction, it is fragmentation. And fragmentation creates instability. Because when your internal world is divided, your external movement will always feel inconsistent. You will start strong and then lose momentum. You will feel clarity, and then fall into doubt. You will move forward, and then question everything again. This is exhausting, because it feels like you are fighting yourself. And in a way, you are. But not because something is wrong with you. It is because parts of you have not yet been brought into alignment. There are beliefs you still carry that do not match the future you are trying to build. Beliefs about your worth. Beliefs about what is possible for you. Beliefs shaped by past experiences that taught you to protect yourself instead of trusting again. These beliefs operate quietly. They don't always speak loudly, but they influence your decisions. They shape what you avoid. They define what you accept. They limit how far you allow yourself to go. And until they are addressed, they will continue to pull you back, even when you are trying to move forward. This is why pushing harder does not resolve the issue. Because you cannot force alignment, you have to allow it. And this is where surrender becomes necessary. Not surrender as giving up on your life, but surrender as releasing control over how everything should happen. Letting go of the need to understand everything immediately. Letting go of the pressure to fix everything at once. Letting go of the belief that everything depends on your strength alone. Because there are areas in your life that effort cannot transform. They require healing. They require truth. They require you to face what you have avoided, not with fear, but with honesty. This is where God begins to unify what is divided. He brings clarity to what is confusing. He exposes what is hidden. He restores what was fragmented. And slowly, the internal conflict begins to settle. You start to feel less resistance, not because everything is easy, but because you are no longer divided. You begin to move with a sense of coherence. Your thoughts, your decisions, and your actions start aligning with each other. And when that happens, progress stops feeling like a struggle. It begins to feel like direction, because now you are not fighting yourself anymore. You are moving as one. Transformation becomes real when it leaves the level of intention and enters the level of practice. Because it's one thing to understand what is happening inside you. It's another thing to begin living differently because of that understanding. And this is where small, consistent shifts begin to change everything. Not big decisions, not dramatic actions, but quiet, intentional choices that interrupt patterns you have repeated for years. For example, there are moments when your first reaction is to rush, to answer quickly, to decide quickly, to move quickly just to escape discomfort. But now, instead of following that impulse, you pause. You take a moment to breathe, to observe what you're feeling, to ask yourself a simple question. Is this decision coming from clarity or from pressure? That pause may seem insignificant, but it creates space. And in that space, you begin to choose instead of react. This is how cycles begin to break. Another shift happens in how you deal with your thoughts. Before, certain thoughts would enter your mind and stay there unchecked. Thoughts of doubt, of fear, of comparison. And without realizing it, those thoughts would shape your emotions, and your emotions would shape your actions. But now, you become aware. You don't accept every thought as truth. You question it. You ask, is this aligned with who I am becoming? Or is this a pattern I have carried for too long? And slowly you begin to replace what once controlled you. Not by force, but by awareness. This changes how you feel. And how you feel begins to influence how you act. There is also a shift in how you approach your relationship with God. It becomes less about asking for immediate change and more about seeking understanding. Instead of only praying for doors to open, you begin to ask for clarity about the path. Instead of only asking for answers, you begin to ask for alignment. This creates a different kind of connection, more grounded, more real. Because you are no longer approaching God from desperation, but from a place of willingness to be shaped. And this is where guidance becomes clearer, not always through dramatic signs, but through quiet conviction, through a sense of peace about certain decisions and a lack of peace about others, through an awareness that grows stronger the more you listen. This is how direction becomes practical. Not something distant, but something you carry within you. And as these small shifts accumulate, something begins to stabilize. You feel less scattered, less reactive, less controlled by urgency. You begin to move with intention, and even if your external situation has not fully changed yet, your internal state has. You're more grounded, more aware, more aligned, and that alignment begins to influence everything else. Because when your inner world is stable, your outer world eventually follows. Not instantly, but consistently. And for the first time, progress stops feeling fragile. It begins to feel real. There is a quiet moment when everything begins to shift, and almost no one notices, not because nothing is happening, but because what is happening is no longer external. It is internal clarity replacing internal confusion. You start to see your life with a different lens. Situations that once triggered anxiety now invite reflection. Delays that once felt like rejection now feel like protection. Silence that once felt empty now feels intentional. This shift does not come from circumstances changing. It comes from understanding deepening. And when understanding deepens, your interpretation changes. You stop asking, "Why is this happening to me?" and begin asking, "What is this revealing in me?" That question alone changes your posture, because now you are no longer positioning yourself as a victim of your situation, but as someone who is being shaped through it. And this awareness begins to dissolve pressure. You no longer feel the need to rush into things just to prove that your life is moving. You no longer compare your timing with others who are walking a completely different path. You no longer measure your worth by visible results, because you understand something most people never truly grasp. Your process is not a delay. It is a preparation that cannot be skipped. And when you begin to accept this, something heavy lifts from your mind. The urgency that once controlled your decisions loses its influence. The fear of being behind starts to fade. The frustration that once filled your thoughts begins to settle, not because everything is resolved, but because you are no longer resisting what is happening. And when resistance decreases, clarity increases. You begin to notice details you overlooked before, patterns that repeated themselves quietly, decisions you made from pressure instead of peace, moments where you ignored what you felt because you wanted quick results. This awareness is not meant to bring guilt. It is meant to bring understanding. Because once you understand your patterns, you gain the ability to change them. And this is where your movement becomes different. You are no longer reacting to life. You are responding with intention. You choose with more awareness. You act with more stability. You move with more clarity. And even if the environment around you has not fully shifted yet, your experience within it has. You feel less trapped, less confused, less overwhelmed. Because now you are not navigating blindly. You are moving with understanding. And understanding changes everything. Because once you see clearly, you cannot return to the same patterns without recognizing them. And that awareness becomes your advantage. It keeps you from repeating what once kept you stuck. It guides you toward decisions that align with who you are becoming. And slowly, without force, without pressure, your life begins to take a different direction, not because everything suddenly opened, but because you finally saw what needed to change. There is a point where your relationship with this season changes completely. You stop asking for escape and start seeking formation. Not because everything feels easy, but because something inside you has become steady. You are no longer reacting to every delay with frustration. You are no longer interpreting every closed door as rejection. You are no longer measuring your progress by how quickly things are happening around you. Instead, you begin to anchor yourself in something deeper. Trust. Not a vague idea, but a grounded confidence that even when you don't understand everything, your life is not out of control. This kind of trust does not come from circumstances improving. It comes from realizing that God has been present even in the moments that felt confusing. that he was not distant when things were unclear. He was not silent when things slowed down. He was not absent when nothing seemed to change. He was working in ways you could not immediately recognize. And now you begin to see it. In how your reactions have changed. In how your thoughts are more stable. In how your decisions are less driven by pressure. These are not small changes. They are evidence that something real has been formed inside you. And this changes how you move forward. You no longer feel desperate to prove something. You no longer feel the need to rush into opportunities just because they appear. You begin to move with discernment. You wait for clarity instead of forcing decisions. You choose peace over urgency. You prioritize alignment over speed. And this creates a different kind of progress. Not rushed, but rooted. Not forced, but sustainable. Because now, your actions are no longer driven by fear or comparison. They are guided by who you have become. And this is where real freedom begins. Not freedom from challenges, but freedom from the internal patterns that once kept you stuck. You are no longer controlled by the same fears. You are no longer influenced by the same doubts. You are no longer repeating the same cycles without awareness. You have grown. And because you have grown, your capacity has expanded. You are now able to carry things that once overwhelmed you. You are able to handle pressure with stability. You are able to navigate uncertainty without losing yourself. This is what God was preparing. Not just a change in your situation, but a transformation in your capacity. Because where you are going requires more than desire. It requires structure. It requires maturity. It requires alignment. And now, you are stepping into that. Not perfectly, but intentionally. And that is what makes the difference. Finally, you understand something that once felt impossible to accept. You were never stuck. You were being formed into someone who could move forward without falling back. And that changes how you see everything from here. There is something you can finally release. The weight of thinking you were failing. Because when you look at everything with clarity now, you begin to understand that what felt like failure was actually formation in disguise. All those moments where nothing seemed to move, something was being built. All those times where you questioned yourself, something was being revealed. All those delays that frustrated you, something was being aligned. And the truth is, if everything had worked when you wanted it to, you would not be who you are now. You would have carried the same patterns into new environments, the same reactions into new opportunities, the same mindset into places that required something different from you. And over time, those patterns would have recreated the same results, just in a different form. This is what God was protecting you from. Not just a wrong outcome, but a repeated cycle. Because without internal change, external change does not last. It only shifts the appearance of the problem. But now, something is different. You are more aware than you were before. You see patterns you once ignored. You recognize triggers that once controlled you. You understand yourself in a way that gives you the ability to choose differently. And that awareness is powerful, because it means you are no longer moving unconsciously. You are not just reacting to life, you are responding with intention. This changes how you walk forward. You don't need to rush anymore. You don't need to compare your timeline. You don't need to force doors open just to prove that something is happening. Because now, you know something deeper. That your life is not late. It is aligned. And when something is aligned, it may not move fast, but it moves right. It moves in a way that can be sustained. It moves in a way that does not collapse under pressure. It moves in a way that reflects who you have become, not who you used to be. So from this place you move differently, with peace instead of pressure, with clarity instead of confusion, with trust instead of fear. And even if there are still things ahead that you cannot see yet, you are no longer walking the same way. Because now you are not trying to escape your season. You are walking through it with understanding. And that is what changes everything. Because the moment you understand what God is doing in you, you stop fighting it. And when you stop fighting it, you finally begin to move.